Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much to everybody who is here. My name is Ekaterina, or how everybody calls me, Katrina O'Neill. I am the principal security researcher and also distinguished technologist at OpenText. But I'm also a doctoral student at the Regis Graduate School of Cognitive Diversity and Education. And today what I want to do is explore raising neurodivergent kids and juggling a career in cybersecurity at the same time. I have a whole lot of things to say, and so I'm going to jump right in. So this year I actually celebrated my 20th anniversary in the tech industry and at my company. But when I started at a small startup called Forify, maybe some of you are familiar with that name. You know, I was employee number 16, and I was the only woman engineer hired. And if you're familiar with the startup atmosphere, you know, I was wearing lots of hats, not just my white hacker hat. And by the way, hope you like my hats. My daughter designed them. And so I was not just, you know, the founding member of security research group. So I wasn't doing just the security research. I was also a developer. I was a QA. I was a build engineer. I was technical writer, professional services, you name it, everything. I flew to conferences and talked to customers. And so I learned a lot. And that was a very cool experience. But then the company grew. It became mid-size, and so this whole transformation also taught me a lot. And then, you know, I survived many different acquisitions, merges, spin-offs, but I'm still at the same company, still at Forify, only now we're part of OpenText. Yeah, I you know, even managed to speak at DEF CON. I was promoted to a distinguished technologist, so I thought my life was complete, but you know, little did I know. About 15 years ago, another hat was added to my collection, that of a parent. And you see pictures of my two wonderful, quirky individuals, my two wonderful kids. On the left is my son, Kirill, who is 15. And on the right is my daughter, Yulia, who is almost 12. Both of them have many amazing gifts, but also have certain challenges. So, for example, my son is, you know, has very strong reasoning and analytical skills and very verbal, and it has the ability to hyper focus on his interests and very empathetic and sensitive. But on the other hand, he also has several challenges. So, for example, he has a hard time, you know, understanding social cues, a hard time reading the room, has a tendency to interpret things literally, has anxiety, time blindness, organizational issues, and a bunch of other things. My daughter, on the other hand, and we thought, you know, with our first child, we're going to learn all of these things, figure them out, and then apply them to my second child, my daughter. Well, again, I was too naive, because my second child is completely different individual. She has very different strengths and very different challenges compared to my son. So even though she's just as verbal as he is, she's very strong in the visual perceptual skills. So she's very artistic. She is very creative. She's always sketching something, drawing. She is a very hands-on person, so she loves crafts, but also very empathetic and sensitive. But unlike my son, for example, who has, you know, trouble with social interactions, she has very strong interpersonal and leadership abilities, and she is an extremely social person. On the other hand, she has her own challenges. So unlike my son, who is an avid reader and loves reading, she has difficulty with reading, writing, and spelling. She has difficulty remembering disconnected facts. I remember how hard it was for her to learn all the digits. I don't even remember explaining digits to my son, because I think he just picked everything up. With her, I remember how hard it was for her to connect that this symbol means that this is that number. She also had a hard time remembering things like, you know, days of the week or months in the year. And I'm sure until this point, even though she's almost 12, she might not know how many days in a year there are. But if you give her a story, it's a completely different story. She can tell you what is going on everywhere, at each part of the story, who is connected to what, who was wearing what, how everyone feels about each other. So she is very good about understanding stories. But she also has, you know, time blindness and organizational skills, just like my son. So for me, even though, you know, my neurodiversity journey really started with the arrival of my kids, at the time I didn't realize that. And in fact, maybe it started even earlier, because the more I learn about neurodiversity, the more traits of it I see in myself and other family members. But I basically treat the beginning of our neurodiversity story as, you know, to be the first day of my son's first grade. Kindergarten was fine for him, even though I was worried because he went to a very academic bilingual preschool. I'm from former Soviet Union, so my family is bilingual. My kids and I are bilingual in Russian and English. But kindergarten actually worked fine for him because he had a very supportive teacher. And she understood him and he loved her, and things were okay, even though during our first parent-teacher conference, we were immediately told that he has trouble transitioning from one task to the next. And honestly, I thought to myself, what is the problem if my child wants to finish what he started? But then if you think about, you know, elementary school, transitions happen every like 5 to 10 minutes. So obviously it wasn't really working for my son or for his teachers. But in any case, first day of first grade, he came up to his new teacher and wanted to give her a hug. And she sort of like distanced herself from him and said, no, you're a big boy now, you're in first grade, we don't do these things. And so somehow everything just went downhill from there, because we started getting bombarded with all these messages from school pretty much every day about my son not wanting to do things. He wasn't being compliant. He was hiding behind the room 15 steps because he didn't want to participate in PE. He didn't want to work with a partner. Was making noises during mindfulness, and on and on and on. And it was just so extremely stressful because honestly, we were super confused with my husband, because we knew our son, you know, we knew him from, you know, being the time that we spent with him at home. And we knew that he is extremely intelligent, extremely curious, has this amazing thirst for knowledge. So all these messages didn't make any sense, because this is not the side of him that we've been seeing. We saw the complete opposite. And so this added a lot of anxiety for ourselves and for our son, unfortunately, because, you know, we didn't know what to do. And he only heard negative things about himself. He only heard from his teachers about how he wasn't doing things, how he, you know, wasn't participating, how he wasn't being compliant. And so his anxiety grew. And unfortunately, his self-esteem diminished. And that's a huge problem that we were struggling with. And so you know, it was super hard to work at that time. Both my husband and I were working full time at our you know, Silicon Valley crazy schedules. But it was difficult to concentrate. All I could think of was, you know, how to help my child. What is going on in general? Why is this happening? And so after frantic searches on Google, and this was, you know, about 8 years ago, I finally, you know, serendipitously came across this webpage with a list of characteristics of twice exceptional children. I did not know the term at the time at all. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term twice exceptional, I'll explain. This means that your child is, on one hand, gifted, so basically has high IQ or high intelligence in a particular area, but on the other hand has, and so that's one exceptionality, and then on the other hand has some sort of learning differences or challenges that are, you know, very asynchronous. Like, so the gap between their gifts and their challenges are huge. And so when I read the list of these characteristics of twice exceptional children, I was like, oh my God, this is my son. Like, every single one of them fits him, even though they seemed completely disconnected from each other. Like, you know, food sensitivity, trouble with sleep, you know, thirst for knowledge, just general sensitivity and intensity. Like, it seemed like they were not connected, but turns out they are for twice exceptional children. And so at least at that point, I knew what to look for, what the term was. And so I went and looked for the psychologist who specialized in twice exceptional children. My son got evaluated, and he was, assessed as being twice exceptional. In fact, it turned out that he is not just gifted; he is profoundly gifted, which means like even the discrepancy between his strengths and challenges is even bigger. And he was also diagnosed. We got the diagnosis of autism and a bunch of other things, dysgraphia, anyway, lots of things. And so at that point, we kind of, what I call it, started going through the 5 stages of diagnosis grief, starting from denial, because we thought that, well, it can't be, it's not possible, right? He cannot be autistic because, and I'm so sorry to all the autistic individuals here, I was completely ignorant 8 years ago. I had no idea what autism meant. I had this preconceived notion about what it is because, once again, I blame it on Soviet Union. I grew up there. I didn't, like, nobody talked about it, and I had no idea what it meant. And so with this preconceived notion, I was trying to match with what I was seeing in my son. I was like, no, he's not autistic. This must be a mistake. And on the other hand, I was like, I don't think he's that smart. In the 99.9 percentile of intelligence, this doesn't make any sense because, yes, he is smart, but the rest of my family is the same. It's not like we're just like some crazy savants or something. But then, the more we started thinking about it, the more we saw that maybe there is something to it, because my son was very much into sciences, and so I signed him up for an online college level course from Moscow State University in astronomy because he loved astronomy, and he did really well, and he was 7, and I was like, maybe there is something to it. Maybe he is actually kind of smart because not every 7-year-old is capable of doing that. And on the other hand, I started seeing his, challenges with social interactions and things like interpreting things literally, which actually didn't make sense to me when they told me about it. I was like, what does that mean? But then I saw it when we were learning about metaphors, for example. He had a hard time interpreting metaphors. Eventually, he got it, and he actually loves puns now. But then later, when he was older, he was in 7th grade. I remember him doing this homework which was just, he was supposed to watch a video and then answer a questions on the worksheet. And one of the questions was, tell me about the most important thing you learned. And I remember how much he struggled over that homework. He was sitting in his room for 2 hours, not knowing what to write. And it just didn't make any sense to me because, wait a second, you're so smart. Like, this is the easiest question possible to me. What is the problem? And it turns out, and again, he actually had a hard time explaining it to me, but eventually I understood that he was stuck because he thought, well, wait, I didn't learn anything. So I don't know how to answer the question about what I learned. And also there are multiple things that are important. So I don't know which one to pick. And so that's when I finally understood what it means to interpret things literally. And so we started talking to other people about what we're dealing with, and we realized that nobody understands us because the people either knew the side of my son that was, the gifted side, and they didn't understand why he's struggling, or they knew him from the, challenging sides, and didn't understand how he would be that smart. And so that created a lot of anger, and that was our second stage of grief. Then we went through bargaining because we got this long list of things to try from our psychologist, assessments to go through, evaluations to go through, therapies to do. And so it's, completely overwhelming. By the way, don't do everything at once. It's impossible. You need to pick something and just stick to it and see if it works. We didn't know that, so we were completely overwhelmed, and we were thinking, well, if only we are going to do this one other thing, then everything's going to be fine. And so that was our bargaining stage. And then eventually we understood that, well, we keep doing things, but nothing works. Like, our son keeps being anxious, we keep being anxious, We keep getting messages from school about him not succeeding there, something like things don't work. And so it was a very, we entered the depression stage, and it was, again, extremely stressful. But eventually, after many years, and I think this process continues, because I think it is an ongoing process, because there's, things change all the time. But eventually we did come to the acceptance stage. And it was really liberating, because we finally understood that we can't change our children. They're great the way they are. Yes, they have challenges, but they have amazing gifts, and we want to celebrate their gifts and support them through their challenges. But in the process of all this, we also felt extremely isolated and lonely, because, again, very few people understood what we're dealing with, but we desperately wanted to find a community. And so we tried to find a community for our whole family. We started with the Russophone community, because my kids and I are bilingual. But after talking to, again, lots of Russian-speaking families, we realized that still very few understand what we're dealing with, because, again, they were all raised in the former Soviet Union. We're in the same situation I was, because they were, moms and dads my age. I mean, of course, we still have friends in the Russophone community. It's just that we communicate with them on about different things. And so we continued our search. Then we tried the science enthusiasts community, because my son was so much into science. We started going to lectures all over the place, public lectures in science. We bought a telescope, we attended start parties, and he connected with lots of adults who are, into science. But we kind of realized that it's not really a community for the whole family. It was great for our son, but on the other hand, he also didn't make any friends. He was just making connections with adults. Basically, there were no peers that he could connect with. So even though we continued going to lectures, obviously, and supporting his interest, we tried other communities. Then we tried the special needs community, because, well, autism is a special needs. Again, that was my thinking at the time. And so we signed him up for swim lessons and horseback riding lessons for special needs kids. But again, quickly realized that we kind of don't belong there either, because there's a big difference between an autistic gifted child and let's say a child with cerebral palsy. Our search continued, and we tried the gifted community. So we thought, okay, we need to leave public school that my son was in, and I'll go to a private gifted school. We're in the Bay Area, in California. There are several schools like that. We started going to open houses and talking to them, and I like them. Some of them for myself, though, not for my son. I couldn't really picture him there, because he is extremely self-driven. He knew exactly what he wanted to learn, and I couldn't see him being put in the situation where he again needs to follow rules and be compliant. Eventually I just asked, so if he is so advanced and so behind in writing because he has dysgraphia, how are you going to support him if we choose this school? And the response was, well, you're probably going to have to hire a tutor. And that's on top of the mind-boggling tuition, which is on par with college tuition. And we were like, okay, this is not happening. And also we realized that there's just so much competition, and it's all about achievement rather than the process of learning. So then we tried the profoundly gifted community. We are part of a group of families, profoundly gifted families. We go to retreats every year. In fact, we're supposed to be at one this coming Sunday. And we, our kids loved it there. They really connected with kids their age there. My husband connected with people, which was amazing, because I'm pretty sure he's neurodivergent as well. Yeah, we don't really keep in touch with people usually between the retreats, but when we're there, we love it. Then the next community we tried was the homeschooling community. And we realized that there's so many different people who homeschool, and they homeschool for different reasons. Some homeschool because, you know, they're kind of in the same situation as us. They feel like their kids are not being supported in school. Others homeschool because they want to travel a lot, for example, and the school is not letting them do that. Or others homeschool because, you know, their kids are in very competitive sports or doing ballet, and their schedule doesn't allow them to go to school. So we realized that there's just so many different reasons to homeschool. And we found the most inclusive community there, and we found several families who are nearby, live nearby, and sort of have the same values about life and everything in general. And we're kind of on the same wavelength. So we're very grateful to the homeschooling community and to these few families. And we're always on the lookout, obviously, for more. And if you just look at this Venn diagram, which where, you know, every circle represents sort of an aspect of our family, you can see that the intersection of these circles is a very tiny spot in the middle. So it becomes clear why we had so much hard time finding our people. But again, we're super grateful for finding those few families who are on the same page with us. In addition to, you know, learning a lot of things on my own by reading books, articles, you know, just to figure out how to support my kids, I last year realized that I want to give back to the community in one way or another. I need to go beyond supporting my own family and would like to help others. And so I decided that the first step to doing that would be going back to graduate school. So now I'm a doctoral student at Bridges Graduate School of Cognitive Diversity in Education. So I'm putting back my student hat on. And I'm actually at my residency right now as we speak. But before I became a student, I also did a lot of research, especially when we decided to homeschool. Because I had no idea what it was about. And the reason we decided to homeschool is because, first of all, our psychologist that was the first thing she recommended, but it took us 1.5 years to finally plunge into homeschooling. But also because we realized that, you know, public schools are only focusing, at least in our experience, are only focusing on the deficits, on what my children cannot do. So that's bad because their anxiety goes up, self-esteem goes down. Private schools are only focusing on achievement. And again, it's all our experience. I'm sure everybody's experience is different. And so there's just no place for us. And so we decided, okay, homeschooling is the only way to go. And so before we did that, I did a lot of research. I read books. And in fact, you would think that these two books are disconnected and have no common themes, but I think they do. In Harari's in Sapiens, Harari talks about hunter-gatherers and how, you know, they taught their children, how their children learned from, you know, following their adults, following older members of the community, and then figuring out what their best skills are, and then using those skills to survive. In his Free to Learn book, Peter Gray also mentions hunter-gatherers and about how they taught their children. And his main point is that currently we're robbing our kids of authentic ways of learning, because authentic ways of learning for kids is through play. It's just for, you know, different kids playing looks different. And in fact, I think it's true for adults as well. And I'll mention that later. But yeah, we're robbing our kids by putting them all in the classroom with same-aged peers and teaching them the exact same thing in the exact same way. And that's just not the way for people to learn. Another resource that I found very useful before we plunged into homeschooling is the Homeschool Association of California conference. I attended several of them, and it just opened my eyes to what it even means to homeschool, because a lot of people, me included, have this, again, preconceived notion of what that means, that it means sitting at a kitchen table, filling out worksheets on your own and reading thick textbooks, but that's not how it needs to be, because really this is just recreating school at home, and it doesn't work for everybody. There are other ways to learn. You can learn through listening to podcasts, watching documentaries, going to a la carte classes taught by experts and people passionate in their field. You can do world schooling, you can unschool. Basically, there's all sorts of different ways to homeschool. And the beauty of homeschooling is that you decide what works for you, and you design your learning experience yourself, and based on what your needs are. And so the next conference is in July 25th to 28th, and I actually will be speaking there too. So if you are looking into homeschooling, and if you're in Bay Area, then feel free to attend that conference. Otherwise, look for something similar in your area. I highly recommend it. Now I just want to quickly, I know I'm running really short on time, but I really want to talk about how my perspective on things changed from how I was 8 years ago and now. And so before I thought, well, okay, now we have this report, we have a diagnosis, now we know what to do, we know how to fix everything. And so we went to school. Oh, I guess the animation is not really working, but sorry, you're going to be overwhelmed with a bunch of words, but bear with me. So we went to school and showed the report and said, okay, do something. You were not the first ones, right? And we realized that the school and society in general has no idea how to support my kinds of kids. Moving on to the second point, kids act out because we don't discipline them enough. That's what I thought, because that's how I was raised. That's what my parents told me, our pediatrician told us. But then I learned that, well, behavior is actually a child's way of expressing their discomfort, because lots of times children cannot express themselves using language just because they either have a difficulty doing that or it's just not developmentally appropriate. Moving on to the next, kids don't do work because they're lazy and don't want to apply themselves. Well, in Ross Greene's famous words, and this is a big name in the field, a big expert, kids do well if they can. And I think that applies to not just kids, but adults as well, because really everybody wants to do well. Nobody wants to do badly. And we all, human beings, want to please each other. If we're talking about kids, and kids want to please their teachers, they want to please their parents. And so when something doesn't work out, that means that there is an underlying reason. And we as educators and parents really need to be the detectives to figure out what it is that is causing them not to do well, what is causing them not to succeed. Moving on to the next, kids must learn to do what they're told because that will help them in real life. Well, with the arrival of AI, we now know that that's totally not true, because now AI is going to do all the boring, mundane things for us. And what's going to be important is not being compliant, which it was important throughout the history, but not anymore. And now what's important is being creative, thinking for yourself, divergent thinking and things like that. Moving on to the next, kids should not be making important decisions because they don't have enough experience. Yes, they don't have enough experience, and that's where adults come in. We are here to put safety limits, safety boundaries, but the kids are human beings and they should be allowed to make choices for themselves, like what clothes they wear, what classes they take, what activities they engage in. Moving on, kids must go to school to learn how to socialize. That was a big one that everybody was telling us, your son is autistic, he needs to go to school. And of course, that's a very common question for homeschool is, but what about socialization? Well, there's not a whole lot of socialization happening at school, in, again, my experience. My son could not connect to anybody. Nobody cared about black holes, so neither adults nor kids. So he could not connect to anybody. He had no friends. He was always by himself. And so socialization in school just wasn't happening for him. Also, there's not a whole lot of time at school to socialize. You cannot socialize during class time. You can only socialize during breaks. Breaks are getting shorter, and plus and if we're speaking of, elementary school, because that's the experience we had, half of your break is occupied by eating. So there's no time. But if you're outside of school, that's when the authentic socialization happens, because we, went to meetups with other kids and their parents. We went to park days, we went to field trips, we went to the library, and everywhere you have to talk to people and socialize. And that is a more authentic way to socialize. Next one, boredom is a choice. Yes, that was like a motto of our school district and our principal. And even though I agree that kids need to learn how to entertain themselves when they are not engaged intellectually, and that brings boredom, anxiety, and depression, that's not a good thing. Everyone is gifted. Yes, everybody has gifts, but everybody has their own needs, and all the needs are different. And instead of, teaching the kids to, in the same way and the same thing, we really need to figure out what their needs are and really cater to every child's need and every adult's need. We need to focus on fixing our child's problems. Well, we kind of discussed that. No, we need to accept for our children for who they are, because they're individuals. They don't need any fixing. They are great the way they are. We just need to, celebrate those strengths and help them with their challenges. And finally, playing and learning are two different things. Again, read Free to Play, a book by Peter Gray. He talks a lot about it, about how kids learn through play, and they claim that adults learn through play too. It's just our play looks different. If we're debugging something and we're totally in the flow, that really is sort of like playing for us, but we're also learning from it. Really quickly, I want to mention the 5 non-negotiable environments. This is now putting my neurodiversity advocate hat on and using all the knowledge I'm gaining from my doctoral program. It's super important to support kids and all individuals, neurodivergent or not, from 5 different perspectives: physical, emotional, social, intellectual, and creative. Because, if you are the kind of person who is distracted by noise, then something needs to be done about it. So that's the physical environment, because then that's the only way you can thrive. It's super important to create a psychologically safe environment, because without such an environment, no learning can happen, no working can happen. And creating such an environment starts with, being really open and understanding and inclusive of various different minds and cultures and just different intersectionalities. And that creates a good foundation for both emotional and social aspects. And I know I'm running out of time. So I have one more slide, but just to emphasize how important it is to create positive relationships and focus on strengths rather than deficits and challenges. And then finally, just a few words about how I was supported through my journey by my company. So I homeschool my children. 8 years ago, or 7 years ago, I went to my manager and said, I have to quit my job because I have to homeschool my children. And his response was, well, why don't you take a year off, go on a leave of absence, and then come back and work part-time for us? And that's exactly what I did. And so I'm extremely grateful to my manager, my team, for letting me be so flexible in terms of how I work, where I work, on what projects I work. Another thing I want to emphasize is how important it is to be aware of our preconceptions and biases, because we're all human beings. We'll never be able to get rid of our biases, but being aware is extremely important, because that does create opportunity for creating that psychologically safe environment for everybody. One small thing is, be kind to each other. That seems small, but it has a huge difference. And finally, just, establish open dialogue to create a niche for every individual, figure out what their strengths are, what their needs are, and, augment their environments to support them in such a way that they can thrive. Thank you so much.